My name is Missy Beavers, and I'm excited to welcome you to the first ever Thyroid Hotline podcast. This is an interactive podcast where we're getting together with our other thyroid sisters to talk about thyroid issues that concern all of us. Because if you are like me, those of you that are here, you may be struggling with thyroid symptoms. You may have been struggling for a long time. You might be going to your doctor who is telling you that your labs are normal, in air quotes, even though you feel awful, you're taking medication and things aren't getting better. That's a really frustrating place to be. I personally was there for 28 years, and this is why I do what I do, because I can't stand the thought of women being stuck with their only option being taking a pill every day for the rest of their life. So this is why we're here. We're here to give you solutions outside of just take a pill every day. I am joined today with my co-host. This is Stacey Price. Say hello.
Hi, everybody. So happy to be here.
So happy to have you. Those of you that are here live can see her cute face. Stacey is a friend and also a graduate of my program. It's called the Healthy Thyroid System. It's my 16-week program to help you uncover the root cause of your thyroid problems instead of, like I said, throwing pills at it. So Stacey is a graduate. She is now a success coach in the program. She's also training in nutrition. She is dynamite. I'm so happy to have you. Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So Stacey is going to be emceeing this conversation. She will be grabbing your questions out of the Q&A. So we have many sisters here live today. Thank you so much, ladies, for being here. Please pop your questions as we're chatting into the Q&A box, and I'm happy to answer those live with you here today, because the whole goal of us getting together is to give you answers that you can't gather otherwise. So to kick off, I know we got a question that rolled in right off the bat. Thank you for this first question. But first, before we jump in, I do want to preface. Stacey, have you seen Sleepless in Seattle?
Yes, I have.
Welcome. That's our age range. I loved that movie. Remember that back in
I
the 90s,
do.
maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you've seen it, maybe you love it, maybe you don't, but it's Tom Hanks. His wife has died. His son calls into a radio talk show and shares the story about his dad, mourning and going through grief. And is it Meg Ryan?
It is. Yeah.
Meg Ryan hears the talk show. He's in Seattle. Tom Hanks is, did I say Tom Hanks earlier or Tom Cruise? It's Tom Hanks.
That's Tom Hanks. Yeah.
It's Hanks. The Tom. So he's in Seattle. She hears the radio show all the way across. I think she's on the East Coast somewhere. Needs to meet this man. They fall in love over the radio. Anyway, that was a long way to tell you that I love the concept of calling into a radio show, being able to share your experience, and having people all over the world connect with you and understand what you're going through and build that shared experience, because that's what women with thyroid issues go through. So I want this to feel like that Sleepless in Seattle feel of you're having a struggle. It doesn't matter where we are across the world. We hear you. We feel it too. We've been through it. So when you're posing your questions, if you want to be creative, you can sign it with something like that. Sleepless in Seattle, sassy on Synthroid. I don't know. I'll think of other clever things. If you feel like you want to do that, that would be fun to sign your name that way. If not, you can just pose your question. We're here to answer. So we did get a fun one right when we logged in today, and Stacey has that one ready. Let's
Right.
go.
Okay. This is from Battling in Baltimore.
So good.
How do you get a handle on Hashimoto's after your thyroid has been removed due to cancer?
Oh, love this. For the women that are with us, can you pop in the Q&A if any of you, well, obviously the one that submitted this question, you are dealing with this, but if any of you have had your thyroid removed or had cysts or nodules or any type of surgical removal, I'd love to know that. So pop in the Q&A if you're here with me live, if you've experienced that. We have so many clients that have gone through this. It is unfortunately common to develop nodules, to develop cysts in the thyroid. A lot of women develop these. And some of those can turn cancerous, or they can have cancerous cells in them. So, of course, the medical model is just to remove the entire thyroid gland. And that happens for many women, many, many, many women. My own mother, this happened to. So I have the experience of my entire life seeing somebody who has gone through the experience of having a nodule that they suspected was cancerous. They removed it. It was not cancerous in her case. However, For 40 years of my life, I've seen her try and find the right medication, try and deal with symptoms after removal. So this question is really wonderful. As a nutritionist, I have a master's degree in nutrition. And my ultimate question is, why did you develop cancer in the first place? Why did you develop the nodule or the cyst? What went wrong? Because a lot of things went wrong before the cancer developed. And simply taking out the tumor, the cyst, the nodule, the cancerous cells, it doesn't fix what broke to begin with. So I focus on gut health. That's where my main interest is. And that's because 80% of the immune cells in the body are made in the gut. So if you have things going wrong in the gut, it's going to trigger an immune attack. It can trigger antibody production. It can trigger all types of immune cell chaos. And those immune cells can be directed towards the thyroid. Some things we do know. Sneaky infections like yeast and mold, which a lot of women deal with. And Stacey knows in our program, a lot of women are positive for this with our testing. They can produce byproducts that cause inflammation in the thyroid gland. They can cause nodules to form. They can cause those cysts to form. That further aggravates the immune system, invites things like cancer to grow. So we have to see what's going on in the gut. What is happening in the gut that is offsetting the immune system, that's allowing these tumors, cells, and cancers to grow? Because just taking out the thyroid gland never addressed the gut. And this is why so many women continue to struggle after thyroid removal. It's because the gut is still massively inflamed. And now, after you've had thyroid removal, the solution becomes a pill. We're going to give you a pill. So you're taking a pill that has to absorb in the gut. And if you've got an inflamed gut, the chances of that pill absorbing well are pretty low. So that's the other problem we see with women who have had thyroid removal surgery, who still have gut inflammation. You can try different types of pills and prescriptions, but maybe they're not absorbing. Maybe you don't have enough stomach acid to even break the pill up. Maybe the pill's making it into your gut and you're only absorbing a tiny amount of the pill. And so you're still feeling really awful because you're not getting the hormones you need. Is that a pill problem? No, that's a gut inflammation problem. So that's where I like to focus. Stacey, do you want to add some thoughts to that?
Yes. And just to validate Maria, she had thyroid cancer and no longer has a thyroid. So
Yeah.
thank you, Maria. I took medication for over 20 years and I just was a walking zombie the whole time. My labs were fine. And I would go in and, tell them all my symptoms. Well, you're depressed. Here's an antidepressant. I did have a nodule grow, so that was terrifying. You don't know what's going on. And there's not a lot of explanation that comes from doctors regarding thyroid disease. It's take this pill, you'll never get off of it. There's nothing you can do. And we'll just monitor your labs once a year.
Yeah.
So it's super frustrating. And nobody talks about the gut piece.
Yeah. Yes, I love that. Thank you for sharing that experience because it resonates so deeply with me too. That was my experience. If any of you here have watched my thyroid fast track class, I share in that class how I was diagnosed with thyroid disease at 8 years old. And I mean, I'm a kid, right? I'm a tiny little kid sitting on the table like we all do, waiting to find out what's wrong with our body. I'd been going to doctors for labs and scans and they thought it was a brain tumor. They thought it was diabetes. They weren't sure what was going on. But when they finally walked in with the diagnosis of Hashimoto's, he looked at my mom and he said, well, your daughter has Hashimoto's. And then he said, she'll take one pill a day for the rest of her life. That's the solution. And I remember my mom gasping and touching the scar on her collarbone where her own thyroid had been removed because she'd lost it 8 years previous to that due to autoimmune disease. So she knew what this meant for her child. And I remember her asking the doctor, well, isn't there anything we can do? I didn't understand this moment in time until I now have a 7-year-old. The idea of being a parent who went through this horrific event yourself and then having your child diagnosed with the same thing, I don't know if there's a different definition for panic. But she was asking out of the depths of her soul, what can we do? Can we do something with food? Can we do something with herbs? I remember she asked him that question. He said, there's nothing we can do to fix this. Diet won't fix it. Supplements won't fix it. She's just going to take one pill a day for the rest of her life. And I believed it. I was 8 years old. A doctor told me that. And I rode that belief for the next almost 3 decades because no one tells you any different. So I'm taking a pill every day for the rest of my life, but I'm still gaining weight. My hair's still falling out. Migraines were a big trigger for me. I had lots of migraines. My skin's a mess. I'm pooping once a week, yet no one is saying that's weird. So yeah, it wasn't until I end up getting a master's degree in nutrition and I start investigating it myself that I discovered all disease begins in the gut. All disease, all of it. And Western medicine is catching up with this now. They're saying that all autoimmune disease is tied to the gut because, like I said earlier, 80% of our immune cells are made there. So if you want to uncover why your immune cells are chaotic and crazy, we've got to check the gut. We can't just take a pill and hope that that's going to solve the production issue. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
No, that's well explained. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So Sisters Live, if you have follow-up questions to that, pop them in the Q&A. Fantastic. Okay, let's shift to another question. We have some really awesome ones coming in here. Do you want to grab one here?
Yes, I will. So could you explain the connection between out-of-range MPV and MCHC lab results between Hashimoto's and multinodular thyroiditis? It's a big words in there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, anonymous attendee, for opening the nerd box. Yes, I can explain this. So these are when you get a CBC lab done. So that's a complete blood count. Your doctor should be running those. We all get those routinely. That will show us what your red and white blood cells are doing. These statements, MPV, MCHC, these are looking at the breakdown of blood cells. So if MPV, MCHC are high or low, it gives us clues about your immune function, but more so it gives us clues about what your red blood cells are doing. If you've got enough minerals, that's the big one. Gives us clues about your B vitamins as well. These will often be completely out of range for the sisters that I work with. MPV will often be high, and then MCHC will be low. Again, this is looking at your platelets, white blood cells, red blood cells. We're looking at the shape and the function of your blood cells. So if you're having issues with nutrient absorption, going back to the gut, you likely aren't absorbing enough nutrients to make a quality blood cell. So that can mean your platelet cells can be too big, too small. They can be disordered. It can mean your red blood cells will be too big, too small. They'll be disordered. So that's what those tests are actually looking at. They're looking at the quality, the size, the count of your cells. So these specific labs, though, they tie directly to B vitamins and to minerals. Like they can be linked to copper and iron and red blood cell distribution. So to answer your question, what is the link? Thank you for asking. And I'm not going to get too nerdy into the specific levels on that because we have to look at the whole picture. So if somebody comes and just says, hey, I have high MPV, okay, we need to put that in perspective of everything else. And the next step that I want to know is what's going on in your gut, because my own case is very, very similar to this. For years, I had really low iron, really low ferritin, really high RDW, issues with MPV. So showing that my blood cells are misshapen, too big. They're not carrying oxygen around well. But the doctors would just say, well, you're just anemic. Take iron. Just take iron. So I did. I took iron and it made the problems worse. And I became more constipated. I had worse issues absorbing my thyroid meds. It's because the issue is in the gut. So this is where gut testing comes in. So if I saw someone with this, I would say, okay, we need to see what's going on in the gut. So my favorite test we use in our program is called the organic acids test. Simple urine test, comes to your house, you pee in a cup, freeze it, send it back to the company. From that test, I can see if we're dealing with bacteria, fungus, mold, if we've got maybe some parasites going on, what is happening with absorption. It will show me if you're absorbing your vitamins, which most women with nodules are not. So, those markers on the test are clues that you're not absorbing nutrients well. Why are the nutrients not absorbing well? What's going on in the gut? And then usually what we find in the same circumstance, and I can give you a good example. One of our thyroid sisters had high labs like this. She had low MCHC, which tells us we've got absorption issues. She had a high MPV, high RDW. Her testing showed lots of yeast and lots of mold. Well, when you have that in the gut, it coats your sweet gut lining so that you can't absorb your nutrients. Okay, you're not absorbing your nutrients, so that's why those markers on your labs are low or high. But those same fungus among us, the fungus in the gut, they produce something called oxalates. Those get into the thyroid gland and they produce the multinodules. So this is kind of the connection by which we started with a marker on the lab. We had to go investigate, is it an absorption issue? Yes, it is. But also whatever's blocking the absorption is creating the nodule. So it's kind of like we have to investigate, put on our little detective hat, Sherlock Holmes the situation. And for this specific sister, once we got the fungus under control, so we did a very targeted for her protocol, those numbers normalized, and even some of her nodules started to decrease. It was really exciting because hers were visible. And as they were decreasing, we were able to see that sweet, sleek neck coming out of the woodwork. We've seen that a lot in our program, huh, Stacey?
We have, and we do get a lot of women who come in and I eat clean. I take, the correct supplements. My diet is perfect. Why do I feel so poorly? And with you saying the yeast, the mold, it coats your gut and people don't realize that you can't absorb. And so you may have the most perfect diet, but your body's not getting what it needs.
Beautiful. And one of the most common causes of that, and I hesitate to start a riot, but one of the most common causes of that yeast overgrowth is birth control, oral birth control. And it's a bummer because so many women, there's no judgment on birth control use for me ever. But so many women aren't informed or unaware of how birth control impacts the gut. And so you end up with this yeast overgrowth because of the birth control pills. And then that yeast overgrowth depletes your nutrient absorption. The birth control pills also offset the good bacteria in the gut. They offset estrogen balance. And then unfortunately, that suppresses thyroid hormone production. So many, many women after years of using oral birth control end up with thyroid issues because those are just two factors, the estrogen and the yeast, but that can happen from birth control. The other common trigger is antibiotic use. And I think a lot of us from the 80s and 90s went through this. You can tell me, Stacey, that was a period of time where you'd go to the doctor with a sniffle or a cough and you'd get amoxicillin, penicillin.
All the antibiotics you want anytime you want them.
Well, I heard you sneeze, so here's some bubblegum flavored penicillin.
Exactly.
So a lot of us in our youth and growing up took a lot of antibiotics, and that upsets the gut flora as well, and that allows these little yeasties and pathogens to grow, and then those end up suppressing the thyroid too. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Stacey. That addition of like, I'm doing everything right.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
It's so frustrating. Yeah, that's really helpful. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Should we do another?
Yeah. Well, we have a great question. It ties right in. It's from Rumbly Tummy.
Yay.
Love that name. How do you know if you have yeast or mold, and what tests can your doctor run to determine it?
Thank you. So good luck talking to your doctor about this. Oh, I shouldn't laugh. It's unfortunate. So doctors are amazing. I love doctors. Stacey and I were chatting about this the other day because both of us have cancer in our families. My husband's dealing with leukemia. Both of Stacey's parents have had cancers. If I have cancer, I'm running straight to a doctor.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Doctors exist for keeping us alive. And I am grateful and blessed for the doctors we have in our life. I never, ever want it to sound like I'm doctor shaming. However, they are trained to diagnose and treat. So they're trained to find the big scary things that are happening and then provide a treatment solution in a pill form or a pharmaceutical form. That's their job. And like I said, I'm grateful because they've extended my husband's life 10 years now past his diagnosis. So thank you, modern medicine. However, modern medicine does not recognize the existence of yeast. They will recognize it as a yeast infection. If you go into your doctor, generally they'll send you to an OBGYN. You might have, usually it shows up as a vaginal yeast infection. So they might do a swab. They might say, oh yeah, that's candida. You've got candida. That is a yeast infection. If you try moving that conversation past a yeast infection into the gut, you may get laughed out of an office. How do I know? Because I've done it probably a dozen times. So I had terrible issues with yeast. Even as a kid, my mom talks about as a kid, I was having UTIs, I was having yeast infections, I was chronically constipated. She was bringing up to my doctors in the 80s and 90s, could it be candida? And laughter, that doesn't exist. That's only for yeast infections. And then it became known for causing toenail fungus. So now we can agree if you have toenail fungus and you go to the doctor, they might say that's yeast, but it still hasn't trickled up to doctors being willing to say it could be in your gut. And keep in mind, if you're manifesting with the things I just said, if you're manifesting with yeast infections, if you're manifesting with yellow toenails or athlete's foot, or you're having dandruff, you're having under the boob rashes, that's a telltale sign. If you shave your armpits and you get a rash in your armpits, these are all really amazing clues that you've got candida in your gut. Because remember, the immune system sits there. So if you've got this yeast that's overrunning your digestive tract, you're going to have these symptoms all over the body. And if you go to the doctor, they'll spot treat it. So they'll give you some toenail solution, or sometimes they'll give you pills for that. They'll usually give you a one-time pill for a yeast infection or a one-time pill for athlete's foot, those types of things. So anyway, to answer your question, what tests can the doctor run? They don't really exist. And they can run some blood tests to check for candida antibodies. That would be to say, is your immune system where you have candida? But they don't really have a model to address or treat it. So keep in mind, as I said before, doctors' jobs are to diagnose and treat. So their tests are developed to find the problem, prescribe a pill. Candida can be a little bit harder to find than that. So the reason I love the organic acids test, that's the test we use, it's looking at urine. Urine can't lie. If something shows up in your urine, it was in your body, right? Unless you use someone else's urine. But if it came out of your body, it was in your body. So what we're looking at with the organic acids test is some acids that are produced by candida. And candida is that yeast I've been talking about that creates all these issues. So if you pee and you have these yeast acids from this yeast in your urine, that's a pretty good clue that we've got some candida going on. And that gives us a direction to investigate where we need to go and what we need to do with that. So to answer the question, what can your doctor order for that? Unfortunately, not much. One thing I do want to put a little piece in about, some women will listen to this and they're going to go to their doctor and say, hey, can you order me an organic acids test? And your doctor will look at you like you have 7 heads. And it's because, yes, they can order an organic acids test. They absolutely can. They can order a test that looks at your urine. This will look for usually 7 to 9 markers that will rule out ketoacidosis, which means like diabetic complications, and it will rule out some genetic disorders. That test is amazingly helpful if you have either of those going on. It does not check for these acids that I'm talking about, the acids that look for fungus and mold and bacteria. It's just checking for genetic programming and for blood sugar regulation. So I have had women who go to the doctor, they say, hey, can you get me an organic acids test? And the doctors are like, okay. They get the women the cup, they pee in the cup, they come back for their follow-up and they say everything was normal. And then the women say, what? but I have all these symptoms. And so we have to realize it's because we're talking about two different tests. We're talking about the test I use looks for over 70 markers that include gut, liver, adrenal, neurotransmitters, and the tests the doctors have access to. We're going to make sure you're not having diabetic ketoacidosis. It'll be good. They'll tell you that you are not dying, which is great news.
Good news.
Very good news for people like good news.
Yes.
But yes, did that answer the question? Stacey, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do. It's very hard talking to doctors sometimes, asking for different tests or different explanations. So when I got the organic acid test, I was blown away by the information, and I finally had validation in the way that I was feeling for so many years, for decades. So the organic acid test that you run, it was just a lifesaver for me.
I love that. And Stacey liked it so much, she tested her whole family.
Yes, all but 2 of my stubborn kids have done it.
We found some great stuff. I feel the same way. Once I saw my test, after 28 years of taking thyroid meds and not having solutions and going to the doctor and getting labs done that were quote unquote normal. Like I said, my main abnormal symptom was anemia, and everything I was doing wasn't working. And so once I discovered this testing I went to a gut conference is where I first discovered it. And that's where at that gut conference, it was so great. It was one of the leading gastroenterologists, and he got up on that stage and he said, well, we have new data now, and it proves that all autoimmune disease begins in the gut. And I'll never forget that conference. It was nutritionists and doctors and MDs and, all the medical professionals. And there was like this, the sound that happened in the ballroom of this hotel. And he said, yeah, we have proof for that now. And I'm going to show you today. And he, through his presentation, showed exactly that, okay, if you have an autoimmune disease, we've got to check your gut. And this was like maybe 5 years ago for me, 5 or 6 years ago. It was my light bulb moment where I was like, holy cow, I have been dancing all around all of these different tests for nearly 3 decades in my body. What test do I need to do? And that's where I learned about the organic acids test, went and got training on it, got my own test. And like you, Stacey, it was like the first time in my life I had proof. It's like, here's the proof. The markers are crazy.
I'm not crazy. It's not me.
Yes, I'm not crazy. Look at this red line. And here's a funny follow-up. So it showed that my candida was through the roof. My bacterias were completely messed up. I saw a sister pop in the Q&A here just a minute ago about chronic strep. That was my issue. So as a teenager, I had strep constantly. For 2 years, I was on antibiotics, constantly having strep. Well, if you take that much antibiotics that consistently, it's going to create candida. But here I was 20 years after that, having all these symptoms. So I get my organic acids test. I've got this candida that's through the roof. I've got this bacteria that's through the roof. Everything's crazy. And because I've gone through the trainings, because I have a master's in nutrition, I knew what I had to do, the next steps. Like now that I had a visual, I knew the next steps. But I had a hematology appointment after that. So this is the doctor that I'd been seeing twice a year for my anemia. And I took it into him and I was so excited. And I was like, I have the answer. I was so excited. And I showed him, and it was a visual, and there's no mistaking this test, guys. The line will be off the charts, and there's a big red bold H high. So I showed him, I put it there on the paper table, and I was like, look, this is why I'm anemic. And he looked at that and he was like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. And I was like, oh yeah, right. Sorry. So this is an organic acids test. My pee shows that I have acids that show that I have candida. And he was like, that's not significant. There's no significance in that. That causes vaginal yeast infections. And I said, right, in my gut. So I was explaining to him that this amount of yeast in the gut is going to prevent iron absorption. Also, yeast loves iron. So here I was taking oral iron, and my yeast factory in my gut was like, yes. And it was using that iron to build walls around itself, to fortify itself. That's why I wasn't feeling any better, because the nutrients were being stolen. Anyway, I showed him that, And I explained that to him. And I said, this is why my iron levels are not increasing. Like, we have visual proof. And I just remember I was so excited, and he looked at me like I had three heads. And then he said to me, this is not actionable. This is not actionable. I can't do anything with this information. And it was heartbreaking. And I just was like, okay, well, what should we do? And he's like, well, we can do another iron infusion, and I'll order those for you. And then I'll see you back in 6 months. And I left there discouraged, because that has been all of my experiences at the doctor, like, this is happening. No, that's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
Help me. I did help you. Have you experienced that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's devastating. So I'm a huge fan of being your own advocate, because I've had to do it. The women I work with have to do it. We still have to I'm still doing it. I'm going to go back and see that doctor, by the way, in a couple months for my annual iron check. And I'm going to continue to advocate for myself, because we are in control of our own bodies, and we're the only ones that know how we feel. So going in and stating that, and knowing that even if they don't agree with you, even if they poo-poo you, even if they laugh you out of your office, what you're experiencing is real. It's
Mm-hmm.
happening. And finding support and people who can actually interpret the data, that's where you find solutions.
For sure.
Okay, coming off the soapbox.
Okay. Well, let's go over to Overwhelmed in Idaho.
Love it.
Love it. So she gave us some numbers: 0.8 for the FT4, 2.1 for FT3, TSH is 30.9, RT3 6.7. Functional practitioner put me on 15 milligrams of MP. I got had terrible skin for a month. Switched to Levo 25. I feel no better. These labs are after I've been on meds for 2 months. Been supplementing small amount of iodine, and she did a blood test. I've learned this isn't a reliable method. Panicked because it showed iodine at 462. Told me to stop. As soon as I stopped, my chronic headaches and bloat are back.
This question is phenomenal. Thank you, Overwhelmed in Idaho. I want to work with you. This is so common, what you're experiencing. We see this with our women all the time. Can you pop in the Q&A, did your functional medicine doctor check your antibodies? Did I look over that, Stacey? I don't see any antibodies on that list.
No, I didn't see it there.
Yeah, that's really important to check. So let me do a quick recap. By the way, this is the last question we'll take, because I want to honor everyone's time. Let's do a recap of how the thyroid works, and then I'd love the answer to that question. So when we're talking about thyroid health, what we're talking about is the brain. The brain watches over all the hormones in the body, and it is monitoring every single cell, and every single cell in the body has a thyroid receptor. Every single cell in your whole body needs thyroid hormones. That blows me away. Every time I say that, I get chills, because I'm like, every single cell. This is how important the thyroid is, right? So Stacey and I were just talking before the call, being cold all the time. Like, many women with hypothyroidism are just cold. Like, our fingers are cold. They never quite get warm. That's because even down in our fingers, these cells need thyroid hormone. They need that to function. So if your cells are not getting enough thyroid hormone, your brain is going to witness that, and it's going to say, oh, we've got a problem. We need more. So the brain will send out TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, to stimulate the thyroid. It's named so appropriately. So it'll stimulate the thyroid gland here in the neck. If you're watching this, I'm touching my neck. So it's this little butterfly gland right here below our Adam's apple, and it's going to stimulate the thyroid to make hormones. The hormones it makes are T4 and T3. T4 is not usable by the cells. So 90% of what the thyroid makes is T4. And to add to this question, T4 is a fancy word for 4 iodine molecules stuck to a protein. So we're talking about 4 iodines, 1 protein, that is T4. But your cells can't use that. So you just made a bunch of T4, and your cells have a receptor for T3. So this is the step where most women are broken. We might be making T4 just fine. Thyroid's doing great. Those levels are fine. That T4 will go into the gut and the liver, and in a healthy gut and liver, and a little bit at the cells, it'll get converted to T3. So basically one iodine will get removed and it will be T3. This is what the cells can use. So that step I just mentioned, the step between T4 to T3, a lot of things can go wrong. And a lot of those things are in the gut and the liver, which is where I focus with my clients. Back to overwhelmed in Idaho. I'm not allowed to comment on labs for people I'm not working with, but I can tell you what functional ranges should look like. And you're certainly out of the range of where we want things to be. So in this specific case, I like to see free T4. 0.8 is at the bottom of the range. I like to see that in the middle. So right away, we can see the fact that the TSH is high. That tells us that your brain is aware. Excuse me. It tells me your brain is aware that your cells are not getting enough thyroid hormone. So it is screaming. The higher TSH gets, the lower your thyroid is working. So the brain is screaming. It's like, it starts with like, hey, we need some more. And then it gets into the tens and it's like, hey, we need some more. And where you started with a TSH of 30, it's like, we need some more. It's screaming at that point. It's telling your brain is telling your thyroid to make more. But this is where it gets tricky. Remember, the thyroid is supposed to respond by making T4. That's not happening. It's at the bottom of the range. So something then is likely happening within the thyroid gland that is preventing that production. But hang on. The T3 is actually kind of okay. Well, I can't comment too deeply on this because I don't know what your lab range is. So assuming this is a standard lab range, actually your free T3 is low. But just know, check your lab ranges. Every lab has a different range. But if T4 is low, T3 is low, we're finding out that there's a production issue and there's a conversion issue. That's going to cause your TSH to keep screaming and getting higher and higher and higher because the gland's not producing, the hormones aren't converting, the cells aren't getting what they need. So your functional medicine practitioner, by the way, did an excellent job by going in with 15 milligrams. So many doctors will come in with like massive amounts, like 180 milligrams. That is going to blow you out of the water. The actual research shows that you're supposed to start with 15 milligrams and then work up 15 milligrams every 2 weeks. That is the best way to do it if you don't want to feel like a complete crazy person. So good job on that. But we saw when you added that in, and then when you added iodine, your TSH got even crazier. This generally is tied to autoimmune issues. So did we find out if there were antibodies checked?
The thyroglobulin antibody was less than 1.
Okay, so that's just one antibody and that one's fine. I'd be curious to know about TPO antibodies, thyroid peroxidase. These are, thyroid peroxidase is used in the thyroid gland to make the thyroid hormone. And if your immune system, keep in mind, if your gut is a mess and it's triggering your immune system, or if you've got sneaky little infections in the thyroid gland, your immune system is going to target that tissue. And that is going to prevent you from making T4. So this case is really, really interesting. It's not beyond anything we've seen in our program. One of our sisters, who I'm thinking of right now, had a very similar situation. Her TSH was at 80 and wasn't producing here. Hers was tied to yeast, like I was just talking about. She had a lot of yeast going on. So we got the yeast under control. Her TSH came down. It's now, I think her last labs are at 5. So that was without changing any prescription medications. That was strictly by working in the gut, getting the immune system under control, and helping that communication between the brain and the thyroid. Did I get too nerdy? Stacey, follow that up.
No, not nerdy at all. She found her TPO is less than 9.
Okay, so TPO above 2 is considered an immune activation. So that tells us that the immune system is aware. I do want to make this clear though, because after this conversation, many women will go check their labs and some women will have TPOs in the thousands. Yeah, we have some sisters that have TPO antibodies of over 3,000. Like the test can't even read it because the test only goes to 3,000. The actual number is not an indication of how bad it is. So I want to make that clear. You can have it in 3000s and have no symptoms. You can have it at 9 and have raging symptoms. So we're just using that marker as a clue that the immune system has been activated. I would like to give another follow-up story. This is a podcast, so I can say the word COVID. We have to be really careful on the social media because the bots hate it. And if we say COVID on the social medias, they lose their minds. I went through this personally. So during all of my Hashimoto years, my TPO antibodies, my thyroid globulin antibodies, they were elevated. They were in the hundreds at some points. Getting off of gluten, super important because gluten can trigger those antibodies. So once I ditched gluten, antibodies came down. And then when I fixed my gut, as I've been talking about in this conversation, they fell to 0. So my antibodies had been at 0 for like, I don't even know, probably 5 or 6 years. Then I got COVID. And if you are a sister that is here live with us and had worse thyroid symptoms after COVID, please pop in the Q&A because I want to know. COVID does a number on the thyroid gland. First of all, it activates the immune system. But secondly, it disables the enzymes in the gland that are needed to make thyroid hormones. So I started having thyroid symptoms again, which was really frustrating because I'd already done the gut work. I knew what I was doing. I'm helping other women get better. Why am I having symptoms, right? And I ran a repeat thyroid panel. My antibodies had jumped to 45. So that was incredibly helpful information because my thyroid labs were still optimal. So the actual TSH, free T3, free T4, they were great, but my antibodies had jumped. So that was my little clue. Okay, we've got some immune activation here going on. We need to investigate that. We need to get some more clues about what's happening here. So that was in the same time period that I was kind of doing the organic acid testing as well. But when I ran that, I was having a lot of mold. The organic acids test will not test for viruses, and there's really not a lot of testing for viruses. Just know if you had COVID, your thyroid problems are worse, there is likely some immune activation going on with that. And so addressing that as we work on the gut can help bring those antibodies down. So I just had my labs done last week. They are back down to 2. Thank you. So that was using evidence not to panic. That's using the labs to give us clues to see what we need to go after and know that, like I said, the actual number doesn't tell us the severity. It just tells us that the immune system's aware something's happening. So let's figure out what it is.
Yeah. And I'd like to chime in on labs because when you're not educated in labs and you rely on doctors to tell you what's going on, those numbers can be really scary. And you can think, oh my gosh, this is it. I'm dying.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's clues. It's clues on what's going on in your body. And all of those can be corrected. But you have to be educated in knowing. And a big part of our program taught me all this education. And now when I get my labs, I'm like, okay, well, this is not quite right. So let's investigate what's going on there.
Yeah.
And, you can fix these things. You can bring them into the optimal ranges. You can feel like a normal person. So,
yeah, I love that. Thank you for that. That was one of the big driving forces in creating the Healthy Thyroid System, which is my 16-week program. It's to give women the education and tools they need to be their own advocate. So like you said, Stacey, within the program, we educate about all of this. We give you the optimal ranges. We show you how to achieve those. We help you understand that if this is off, it's not permanent. This is something that we now know we need to work on, and here's the ways that we can work on them. So your labs become a tool and a support for reaching optimal health versus going to a doctor, being told that they're normal, and then getting home and seeing that there's lots of highs. I've had that happen.
So confusing. So confusing.
Yeah. So my goal is to arm you with that information, the information you need to be able to navigate this for the long term. So with that being said, we would love to help you find the root cause of your thyroid problems. So if you would love to work with me, please head to www.thyroidhotline.com And there you can book a call with my team where we can talk about what's going on with you. We can talk about the testing and the system that I use and get you the shortest path to solutions instead of guessing at what supplement to try next, what starvation diet, what doctor to see next. We'll get you some solutions. Thank you, ladies, for those that attended. This was fun. Was this fun?
This is great. I wish we had more time. I would love to answer all these questions. And thank you so much, all you ladies, for joining in and popping these questions. And we really do appreciate it. And we love helping women with thyroid disease because we've been there.
We've been there, and we cannot stand the thought of another thyroid sister being stuck where we were. I cannot handle that thought. So we will do this again. We're going to do this again in 2 weeks. So these questions we didn't get to, please bring them next time and or book a call with my team. We'd love to answer these questions and show you the quickest path. Like I said, show you some solutions. So thank you all for attending. I enjoyed this. Let's do the Thyroid Hotline again. We'll meet back here in 2 weeks. Until then, I am sending you lots of love. Talk to you soon.